Hello everyone and welcome back to a very special deck guide, this time featuring the newly supported Shaddolls for Genesys. I did a decksploration with these guys months ago and man, I have been waiting for the new support to drop. So much so that this is possibly the most well-tuned deck I've released. See, I've been testing this one in person with people at my locals for a good month now, and I figured out a lot of fun and solid tech and used it to make two flavors of Shaddoll, both of which I'll go over here, as well as some additional cards you can play and my thoughts behind the builds. First up is what I consider the more competitive build, Wake Up Shaddolls. This is a build focused on going first and setting up a bunch of flip monsters if you can believe it. Starting with the actual Shaddoll monsters, these all have a flip effect and a different effect when sent to grave by card effects specifically. Squamata is the most important, since when it is sent to grave, it can send any other Shaddoll card from deck, so you just have access to anything off of him. His flip effect is to pop a monster, and note that all of the Shaddolls can only use one effect or the other each turn, so you can't flip up Squamata, pop a guy, and then also fuse it off to get the Foolish. Grista is one of our new cards, and on flip can copy the flip effect of any other Shaddoll in grave, and when sent, lets you fuse by banishing materials from hand, field, and grave. This opens up a lot of powerful lines on both yours and your opponent's turn, but be aware that this and one other new card lock you hard into Shaddolls from the extra deck for the entire turn. It seems they got tired of people using us as a Winda engine in other decks, but that just means we have to get creative with the main deck instead. Wendy can special from deck on flip or when being sent to grave. The only difference is that if she was sent, then what you summon has to come in face down, which is normally preferable anyways. Hedgehog searches a spell trap on flip or a monster on send. Ariel summons a banished Shaddoll on flip to help our grind game out, or banishes 3 from either grave on send so we can use her as a disruption. Dragon bounces a card on flip or pops a back row on send. Beast draws 2 and discards 1 on flip, or just draws 1 on send. And lastly, Falco summons a Shaddoll from grave face down on flip, or summons itself back face down on send. Now this is where you think, wait, that's it? Where's the starters? None of them special themselves from hand. And you're right, all of the Shaddoll monsters are bricks. None of them actually perform a combo or do much of anything alone. This makes the engine into a sort of fusion toolbox where the important part of the deck is being able to perform a fusion summon of some kind, or at least discard one of our names, and you get the effects based on which monsters you use. It's not the easiest to play, and yeah, sometimes you just open 4 names and cry, but it's a very, very fun, technical, and rewarding deck nonetheless. Speaking of fusions, let's get into our spells. Lev is the other new card that locks us whole turn, but it's an absolute beast. Able to send a fusion from the extra deck to grave on activation, and spoiler alert, the Shaddoll fusions all have grave effects. Then it sits on the field and lets you tribute a fusion monster to summon a Shaddoll fusion from the extra deck with a different attribute, but its attack becomes 0. I doubt I have to explain how good it is to be able to get 2 fusions for the price of 1 and ignore requirements when choosing the best one for any given situation. But the crazy spells don't stop at Lev. Void Unleashing lets us reveal a Shaddoll card to add the other 2 card types from deck to hand, then discard a card. If you reveal a monster, you get a trap and a spell. If you reveal a trap, you get a monster and a spell, and a spell nets you a trap and a monster. Because it discards as part of the effect, it also triggers any Shaddoll monsters that you discard with it, so it works as another pseudo-starter. El Shaddoll Fusion is a quick play polymerization, and Shaddoll Fusion itself is a whole lot more than that. This was the first branded fusion, able to use monsters from the deck as material, but only if the opponent has an extra deck monster themselves. Otherwise, it's just an archetypal poly. Because all of our monsters have effects on being used as material, this just lets us trigger a cascade of effects that chain block and break a board while building our own. Resolving Shaddoll Fusion going second tends to just win the game. For our 1 trap, Resh reborns a Shaddoll, then can banish from grave along with another Shaddoll card to flip a monster up or down. Mostly we just use the reborn effect, except in emergencies. Then we have a ton of ways to add this back from the grave to our hand to use again and again every turn. And that's it for the Shaddoll names. We're on to our various sub-engines. Starting with the biggest and most important, the Wake Ups. This is a series of generic flip monster support pieces that fit in perfectly with the Shaddolls. Kuro is the most important piece to play at 3 because it lets you reveal itself in hand to add any other wind flip monster, then discard a card. She can also quick effect flip a face down monster face up, and her own flip effect is to book something. Note that along with the other wake-ups, Wendy is a wind flip monster, so Kuro can just add her, then discard her, to summon any Shaddoll name from deck face down so that we can get whatever effect from it we need. Mocha is one that I was skeptical on at first, but the more I played her, the more I understood how incredible this card is in the deck. Her most important effect is to target a face-down monster on the field, summon herself from hand, then flip up the target. That lets us trigger a set Shaddoll or other wake-up name, which is actually a 2-card combo with a bunch of different things, and increases our consistency a lot. Her actual flip effect is to give something 1000 attack, but send it to grave on end phase, so it's kind of removal if you use it intelligently, or it can help you close out the game just by giving something 1000 attack. And lastly, on end phase, she flips herself face down for free, which notably is a soft once per turn, which very much comes up. Lastly for the cups is Earl, who can discard another flip monster to summon herself face up or face down. Then on end phase, she can summon another flip, any other flip monster, from grave face down, and her own flip effect sends cards to grave up to the number of flips you control, non-targeting. Shaddoll is well known to lack big haymaker plays that can clear out a board and make way for lethal, and this remedies that for us in this build. Then we have a small Cartesia package. Cartesia is a light monster that can quick effect Fuse, which is another way to actually put Shaddoll monsters from your hand to use, and not only that, she adds back from grave on end phase if a fusion was sent to grave that turn. Cartesia is so good for the deck that we play 2 of her and 3 fusion deployments as well, which lets us reveal a fusion in the extra deck to summon a monster from hand or deck that is specifically listed on that fusion. There's a fusion that lists Cartesia as material, so think of this as copies 3 through 5 that don't take your normal summon. Then we've got some spice I figured out, with 3 copies of Rescue Ace Impulse and 1 Fire Attacker. Impulse is an acceptable normal summon since you can just use it to turn off an opponent's monster for the turn, but much more importantly, if the opponent activates a monster on the field, you contribute Impulse from your hand to summon a different Rescue Ace from deck. That's where Fire Attacker comes in. It's a 2200 body that triggers if an opponent adds a card to their hand from anywhere else besides drawing it, and then it lets you draw 2, then discard 1. Basically, if the opponent normal summons Lucius, you contribute the Impulse, summon Attacker, Lucius searches, Attacker sees the search and lets you draw and discard. Because the discard is part of the effect, that triggers any Shaddoll effects, which gives us turn 0 plays. Eclipse lets us disrupt the opponent while also flipping our guys back down to use their flip effects again. And then, disclaimer, I expected we would have fewer points to work with, so the triple tack package is the least tested part of the deck, but it feels great since you can set Karma Cannon if interrupted, or going second you can search Heavy Storm, or Shaddoll Fusion, or Void Unleashing, or Fusion Deployment, which are all incredible targets. Then we're going to go through the extra deck before getting into the side this time, since I plan to ramble about the deck building a lot when we get to the sideboard. Starting with Infernoid Evil, who can search a Void spell when sent to grave. That's it. He's just here to send off of Lev to add the Unleashing. Natis pops a card when sent in case you want Lev to help break a board. Then Apkallone is our first proper Shaddoll and takes 2 names with different attributes. On special summon, they can permanently negate a card, and they can't be destroyed in battle, and when sent to grave can add a Shaddoll card from deck or grave to hand, then discard a card. Note that the negate is on special summon, not on fusion summon, so you can use it multiple times by summoning app back with Resh or off of other things. Wendakuru is our first new fusion and takes a Shaddoll and a Wind, and can quick effect flip up any number of monsters on the board, then flip back down a number equal to how many flip monsters went up. This card is a house, and is the reason that this build of the deck works at all. She lets you use the Shaddoll's flip effects at will, which is something they've always struggled to do. You can use Earl to wipe the board on the opponent's turn, you can book the opponent's monsters, just absolutely incredible. And being sent to grave means that she can add any Shaddoll card from grave back to your hand as follow-up. Greasta takes a Shaddoll and a Fire, which means we can use the Rescue Aces for it, and can negate a special summon, then send a Shaddoll card from hand to grave. On being sent, he recovers a Spell Trap. Construct takes a Light and a Shaddoll, and on special can Foolish any Shaddoll card from deck, then if sent can recover a Spell Trap. And if she battles a special summon monster, it's destroyed at the start of damage step, no questions asked. None of Construct's effects are once per turn, and the Foolish off of Construct is full combo, which is why Cartesia is so important for the deck. She counts as the Light and the Fusion spell, so you just need her and any Shaddoll name in hand to make Construct to do full combo. Granguignol lists Cartesia's material so that Fusion deployment works, but it's also, not bad. On Fusion, you can send a high-level Light or Dark from deck or extra deck to grave, which is mostly just Construct or App Cologne, but you can also do Beast from the main deck, which just draws you a free card. Just keep in mind the lock prevents you from using Granguignol that often. Shikiniga takes a Shaddoll and an Earth and can negate and destroy a monster effect, then send a Shaddoll from hand to grave, which triggers its own effects. And then when sent to grave itself, Shek can add back a Spell Trap. Lastly is our other new fusion, Mesha Rare. This takes a Shaddoll, a Dark, and an Earth, and is unaffected by the opponent's spells, traps, and effects of monsters that are lower level than her. At level 10, that covers a lot of the card pool. Not satisfied with being a tower, she can also pay 800 life to add a Shaddoll card or Void Spell Trap from deck back to hand. This is a soft once per turn. We can easily make multiple meshes in a turn, especially going second, and get multiple searches and multiple towers. On being sent, she can reborn another Shaddoll, but be aware that Mesh is the only Shaddoll that must be fusion summoned. That means you cannot reborn her, so once you use all 3 copies, you're more or less out for good. And possibly the most important thing about this card is that she takes 3 materials. She's the first Shaddoll Fusion to take 3 materials, which means that Shaddoll Fusion can now send 3 from deck instead of just 2, which means that Dark and Earth targets are at a premium all of a sudden. Well, at least when we're going second. Now let's talk about the side and my general deck building philosophy here. Genius is a solid option that when sent to grave can prevent a monster from activating an effect for the turn. That has some fringe use going first, but it's a much better effect in a going second centered build of Shaddolls. Same idea with Shaddoll Fusion. You can play the full 3, but if we're going first it's just poly, so I prefer to keep 1 in main that we can search if we end up losing the die roll, and then 2 in the side we can bring in when we know we're going to be going second. You could play more traps like Shaddoll Core, which is a solid card, but with Lev I don't think having access to all attributes is as important anymore. Similarly, Schism costs 10 points and feels a lot worse without Winda, because we can't really play her because she's a whopping 60 points, so I don't think Schism is really worth it in Genesys. Then we get to some pretty interesting cards. Mathematician, Armageddon Knight, and Nightmare Hands are all 1-card starters for the deck. So why am I not on any of them? Well, these guys are really binary. Their entire purpose is basically to send Squamata to grave, and if we have any other way to send a Squamata to grave, then they become pretty obsolete, and we do have a lot of ways to send a Squamata to grave. So Mathemat and Armanite also take our normal summon, which I would rather use on Cartesia or a flip monster. Nightmare Hands is the one I came closest to playing since it doesn't take our normal, but it requires playing an extra brick in the form of Maskmaster, and since Shaddoll's is always bricky already, I decided against adding the one more. Basically, these guys just felt like a trap in testing. They do something that we can already do in a million other ways even without them. Last thing in the side here, keep attributes in mind when building Shaddolls. As an example, Humongous is the smallest unpointed kaiju and normally the obvious choice, but Light is so good to have access to that I would play Thunder King here instead. The attributes should impact your deck building choices. Now let's talk numbers and such. The generally accepted total number of Shaddoll monsters is around 11, which is what we're playing here. Basically, you want 1 in your opening hand, no more, no less. 2 can be acceptable, and sometimes you can make 0 work, but you want 1. You could run 10 or 12 names, but I wouldn't stray too far from that, which raises a bit of a problem since we need a lot of one-ofs that we want access to only when we need them. 3 Squamatas is the most important thing because it gives access to everybody else, and I play 2 Greastas for a specific reason. You see, Impulse isn't just card filtering. Discarding a Squamata or a Greasta triggers a fusion summon that you can use to make the El Greasta or a Shikinaga turn 0 to stop the opponent in their tracks. But that banishes the Greasta, and we still want one available for your turn, so we play 2 of him. You can play 3 to increase your chances of pulling off that play, but more names is more bricks. Again, that would just be increasing our number to 12, which I think is acceptable, but I've been happy with how often I've pulled off the turn 0 play at 2. That's why I don't have Genius in here either. Valka was also almost not in the build, since we have multiple other ways to reborn names now with Resh and Mesh, but this deck forces a grind game like no other, and I found myself wanting as many ways to reborn monsters as possible. The first 2 wake-ups here are 2-card combos with basically anything. The key here is that they're flexible, unlike the 1 cards that I have on the side here. So, for example, Kuro and Mocha is full combo. Mocha and Hedgehog is full combo. Kuro and Wendy is also full combo, etc. They just enable a ton of ways to get there, so 3 Kuros and 3 Mochas feel mandatory. I keep going back and forth between 1 and 2 Earls. On one hand, she adds a lot to the board going first, and can discard a Shaddoll name to trigger its effect. On the other hand, though, she can be a brick and isn't as versatile as the other 2, and you can just search her off the Kuro. But on the other hand, opening her means you can search a different piece, and they're all good and versatile. I don't think you can go wrong at 1 or 2, but 3 probably isn't necessary. That's going to finish up this build, so let's go see a combo and a game before I talk about the other one. Alright, this is the only 1-card combo I'm going to show you guys, and you should never ever have to do this, but if somehow you end up with Lev, 3 Rescue Aces, and a Book of Eclipse in hand, then you can still do something with just the Lev. We're going to activate it and send App Cologne, who's going to add Squamata, then discard the Squamata, who can send Greasta, who can fuse with all 3 to go into Mesharare. I keep trying to call it Meshariel, because that's what its original name was, but apparently it's Mesharare now. Who knows? Then we can add Void Unleashing and tribute the Mesharare with the Lev Shaddoll to send, or to summon out Construct, to send Hedgehog, to add Wendy, so that we have another card in hand to reveal off of the Void Unleashing. We can reveal the Wendy, add a trap, and a spell. Unfortunately, we don't have a good discard here, so we pitch the trap. Again, you'll never have to actually do this. Then we can use the El Shaddoll fusion we searched off of the Void Unleashing to fuse Wendy in hand and the Construct on field into our new Wendikuru, and then the Wendy is going to trigger to summon out Ariel from the deck, and we can add back the trap or the El Shaddoll fusion off of Construct. Unfortunately, we don't have a good way to get both here. Resh is probably better in general. Then we can use Wendikuru to flip up the Ariel to summon Squamata back face down, set whichever card we got back, and end our turn. It doesn't look like a whole lot, but it's pretty good. This is a pop, a Book of Moon. If Ariel gets flipped down and then back up, we can get something else back. It's going to be the Grista here. Or if it gets sent to grave, we can banish a grave. We can use Rest Shaddoll to bring back Construct, and then Construct can foolish, let's say, like a dragon, which pops a back row. Basically, it's a deceptive amount of interaction. There's like 3 to 4 pieces of interaction on board, depending on how the game plays out, which is pretty solid for a 1 card you're never going to have to actually do. Alright, so we're only going to do 1 game for this first deck, unfortunately, because this was a whole really good match, and I'd love to show you the whole thing, but this is going to be long, and the whole video is long as hell, so you're just going to have to settle for the best game. We're going first up against Lunalight, and you can see that this is game 2 of the set. We already brought in Kaijus from the extra deck, as well as a couple of things I just had in there. You're going to see Shaddoll, Core, things like that. I didn't set up a full extra deck. It's mostly just the cards you saw when we were doing the deck profile. But Lunalight can't really afford hand traps, so we just get to go off, and we know what we're up against, so we get to customize our board against them, which is pretty cool. That's why I prioritized Ariel here. I go into Shek, because maybe that can stop them. I hold on to this Kaiju for dear life. I search Dragon so that we can discard it off of the Shek to maybe pop their continuous spell. That can matter sometimes. But I customized the board to set up as much disruption that matters to Lunalight as possible. And of course they have the starter and extension and everything, so we're in for a bit of a ride here. I want to get as much value off of the Ariel as possible, so I just let him go for a while. We do get to pop the back row off of the Shek, but they can extend off of that, obviously. It's not great, but here I think they make the wrong choice in going into Exoton. They pop the board, which Mesh survives, but I just let everything else go to grave. I don't even bother to use the Resh, because we're just going to trigger a bunch of effects anyways. So now we can banish now. They just kind of forced us to use the Ariel effect a little bit early, but we still have 3 really good targets off of it. And then we can add back Lev as follow-up for the next turn. And because they use so many resources to get to and use that Exoton Knight, they're not going to be able to make a Liger here. So they're just going to have to pass kind of on this half board that doesn't really do a whole lot. The trick is going to be closing out the game, because they're pretty well set up for follow-up. So if we can't OTK them here through this board, which is effectively impossible in Shaddoll, then they're going to get to a Liger Dancer. There's no way to stop it. They negate the Shaddoll fusion with Silverhound, but unfortunately for them, Silverhound negates activation, which means we can activate another Shaddoll fusion, so we get it back with our Lev activation. Then we can use it, summon a bunch of stuff. The unfortunate truth is that when Dekuru flips things into face-up defense, we can't put them in attack. So while we can use Earl to wipe their entire board, we're now stuck with a bunch of guys in defense. And while we could clear up some space in various ways, we're just not going to get to 8,000 this turn. So I swing with what I have and pass on just Resh, basically. Again, holding on to this Kaiju for dear life. They rip a Rahu, which really sucks for us, because it allows them to pop our back row and our Wendikuru, so now we have basically no disruption, and they're going to get to that Liger Dancer. So this Kaiju is going to basically have to carry us for the entire game. They search Lunalight Fusion, which lets them get there even easier. Thankfully, in Genesys, they cannot play 2 Liger Dancers. It is, I believe, 51 points, so you just, physically can't. But still, 1 would have been enough to OTK us, because they used the Perfume Dancer's Graveyard effect to drop all of our monsters' attack. But thankfully, because they put Resh in the graveyard for us, we can banish it and one of our constructs to book our own Ariel so that it is no longer in attack position. Which means we get the flip effect to summon a Grista. They can get over the Mesh, we don't care about that, that just gets us back Wendikuru. Now they go for the board wipe, but unfortunately we just get a million pieces of follow-up off of them doing that. So we can summon a couple of guys, add some stuff back to hand, and unfortunately for them, they try to hold the Liger Dancer to interrupt us in the middle of our combo. It's the only piece of interaction they have, probably. So we just humongous it at the start of main 1, and then we can go off. We can flip the Falco, because it wasn't summoned this turn, to summon the Aerial, use it off with Cartesia, because Cartesia comes back every turn. And then we go to battle. Unfortunately, we aren't going to be able to achieve lethal here either. We could have used El Shaddoll Fusion in the battle phase to summon into another guy. We don't have anything with 3400 attack, and we had to normal summon the Cartesia, so we couldn't just normal summon Hedgehog for bonus damage. There was just no way to get there. But we use Lev, tribute the Construct to try and swap out into something. They negate that mostly for the draw, which is fine because the Construct going to grave still adds us stuff back, and now all of a sudden we're a back row deck. And even if they could play a second Liger Dancer, we have Karma Cannon for it. So we add back the Cartesia on end phase, and we don't have a ton of disruption. We've got like Shek, we can summon a guy, we can do a fusion, but we're running low on extra deck. We've got, what is it, App Cologne is, like, pretty good. I do a greedy Karma Cannon, hoping it'll completely stop them, but we knew that the last card in hand was Poly, so that wasn't going to do anything. But because we got through the first Liger Dancer and they can't play a second, they just make a Cat Dancer, realize they can't do anything, and end up scooping the game. Yeah, so now you see why I couldn't show the entire match, because all 3 games were like this. Slow, grindy, controlling. That's what the deck does, and it's pretty freaking good at it. Cool? Cool. So then if that's the most competitive build, why do we need another one? Well, simply put, Shaddoll really struggles to close out a game without having direct attacks, or board wipes, or burn, or anything of the like. So the Wake Up build is slow. Like 30-minute game 1's slow. Like double match loss slow. Meaning that it may very well just not be viable on the back of that fact, even if it is the better build. So I also built a blind second version of Shaddolls that does not struggle to close out a game. That's because the main difference here is these 3 cards. Coatless, when sent to grave, can add an evolution pill, which can banish a dino and a non-dino from the grave to summon a dino from the deck. That's always Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, my boy, a card that's notoriously good at ending games. He can pop a monster of ours either on the field or in hand to flip all of the opponent's monsters down. Then he can attack every monster once each, and if he attacks a defense position monster, like the ones you just set, you can send it to grave and burn the opponent for 1,000. Yep, that's a clear board and up to 5,000 points of burn, and you can do it all off of sending Coatless as the dark target for Shaddoll Fusion. To help facilitate this plan, we play 1 Dinosaur Fusion in the extra deck. It really does not matter which one this is, so play one that you like. That's because the opponent, if they know about the Tyranno plan, will often use any graveyard disruption like a DD Crow to hit the Coatless, which turns off the evolution pill that we searched. But if we have any fusion in the extra deck, we can use Lev to send it as our Lev target, which turns back on the evolution pill. For this build, I took out the Falco and the Aerial since they're for a grind game that we're hoping to never get into, and I put in the Genius and the third Grista to make the Impulse play more consistent. We're on all 3 fusions here as well, since we want to blind second, and a couple of Heavy Storms and 1 Raigeki. We're on Raigeki instead of Dark Hole because we want to use Shaddoll Fusion before wiping the opponent's board so that we can use the deck, then drop Raigeki to clean it up, and if we use Dark Hole, that would clear out the mesh that we're trying to summon off of the Shaddoll Fusion. The reason this build is worse is because we lose consistency when we lose the Wake Cups, and the Tyranno package is a bunch of bricks. No garnets, mind you, and we can normally fuse off Coatless if we open it and just do the thing anyways, and Tyranno is a light target in case we need to use it to make Construct, but still it does just brick more often. That said, it actually ends games in a couple of turns, so it might just be the quote-unquote better build. Alright, and then game 2 with deck number 2, we are up against Blue Eyes going second. We won the coin flip, but obviously we're the ones that want to go second. But that does mean that they know what we're up to, that, like, they don't know exactly what deck we're on, but they knew that we wanted to go second. I don't know how much that's going to change what they do, and their deck ends up being, like, fine by the end, or their end board. This is a Majesty, so they've got a chunk of interaction here. But our hand's really, really good. We force them to negate the Natis because the Spirit Dragon's negate is actually annoying to us. We have a ton of effects that activate in Graveyard. And then we go to Cartesia, fuse with this Greasta in hand. Obviously, they go Gen X for turn 0 to negate that. They only have Light and Dark, which I don't know if it's correct to be making Arms of Gen X return 0 if you're only playing Lights and Darks, but whatever. But they use that to negate the Cartesia. We chain L Fusion, knowing that they're probably going to negate to force this through, which was incorrect. They should have just let this L Shaddoll Fusion go through. The Spirit Dragon is far too valuable to just waste here. But they do, which is great, great news for us, because our hand is still very, very good and gets all the way there. Especially considering the last piece of interaction they have is the Majesty with Eyes of Blue. So we can get to Shaddoll Fusion, activate that, and that just does the whole thing on its own. We have the Double Evolution Pill, which is always the very last thing you want to do in just like the entire turn, preferably the entire game. But we get to where we have a couple of bodies, we use it, we pop the Mesha Rare, which is kind of cheeky because that lets us bring back a Shikinaga that they negated and destroyed earlier. And that's, you know, just like a pretty big body we get. We only lose 200 attack on board to activate the Tyranno's effect. Obviously, most of the time I think you'd prefer to pop something in hand, but we didn't have that luxury right here. But we go to battle. We can send everything to grave, do 3,000 damage. They paid a little bit at the start on their turn, so, you know, they're not 100% full on life. We go to swing with Shek, they use True Light, bring back Blue Eyes, and then bring back the Maiden. I don't think... Is Maiden a mandatory effect? No, you can. They should not have brought back the Maiden, because by bringing back the Maiden, they give us another 1,000 points of damage, and then they have Maiden bring back another Maiden, which gives us another 1,000 points of damage. If they had just brought back the Blue Eyes, we couldn't destroy it this turn. Like, we swung into it, hit for 500, but we couldn't get rid of it, which means we couldn't have killed them here, but we could have, you know, Raigeki cleared the board, had some follow-up. These two both represent disruptions, blah, blah, blah. So we would have been fine either way, but they just handed us lethal on a silver plate there. And we're back with closing thoughts on Shaddolls for Genesys. I, for one, have been really looking forward to this deck and having a lot of fun tuning and playtesting. I like a cerebral deck, something that's going to test my skill. This is one of the reasons I don't like Floodgates, is that they're binary and they have no real skill associated. It's just kind of like, oh, this part of the game's gone. Which is one of the reasons that I'm really glad Winda's 60 points. I wouldn't mind if she was 100. I don't want to play Winda when I'm playing Shaddolls, because the entire strategy just becomes protect the Winda. You know, you're not using Resh to bring back whatever is impactful at the time. You're saving Resh to bring back Winda if they clear it. It's rough. Like, I don't enjoy that. So I'm glad that it's a lot more playable in Genesys. And to the people who, like, a lot of people are naysaying about the deck just because of the extra deck lock, like people hate the extra deck lock on it. There's a lot you can do with Shaddolls, even with the extra deck lock. In the OCG, people are playing them alongside the Ritual of Light and Darkness. People are trying out with Mitsurugi. I mean, just peek behind the curtain here. This is just various builds that I worked on to some extent, and they all do different things. Let's go in here. The new Witchcrafter support got released, and so I started playing around with that. That's an option, because the Witchcrafters don't have to fusion summon on their turn to get value. You can just fusion summon on the opponent's turn, so that's one more thing you'll be able to do coming up in the future. There's a lot of stuff you can do with Shaddolls, is my point. So experiment, get outside the box a little bit, find some main deck stuff, have fun with it, and enjoy playing and actually going second build, because they do not want us to have those in Genesys. And this one works pretty well. Like, it's a little bit brickier, but it has still served me quite well, as you saw in that game. Like, UCT is an incredible card. But that's, I guess, where we'll leave it for this one. I hope you guys liked it, I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.